Arrival journey, 100 years of British Airways, 1990 to 2019, travel of the future. The introduction of a new biometric facial recognition technology has begun its arrival journey, also linked with travel of the future by transforming such airport experience for customers traveling from on international destinations such as Orlando, Los Angeles, and New York, JFK, by streamlining the boarding process by cutting down the amount of time it takes to travel to board an aircraft. It is a unique achievement for British Airways, also as the first United Kingdom airline to use the technology on its arrival journey by linking travel of the future on domestic flight routes around the United Kingdom of Great Britain. The airline was 100 years old on August 25th, 2019, which passed since the world's first scheduled international daily air passenger service took place in Britain on August 25th, 1919. It launched the daily world air passenger service that took place from London to Paris. The flight route took 2 hours and 30 minutes. The air travel has changed beyond all recognition through the decade. The aim was to promote the local, regional, national, and international concept on British Airways travel of the future by starting its arrival journey just 100 years ago. Each decade saw development and present challenges which shaped the mindset journey on travel of the future in the 21st century. The arrival journey on British Airways can trace its origin back to the birth of civil aviation from a humble beginning of Air Transport and Travel Limited between 1919 to 1923. A forerunner company of British Airways, 100 years later, launched the first world daily international scheduled air passenger service between London and Paris on August 25th. Route on that first maiden flight that took 2 hours and 30 minutes to reach Paris, which took off from London Hounslow Heath, very close to London Heathrow Airport, 100 years later. Carried a single passenger by the name of Mr. George Stevenson Rees, an Evening Standard newspaper journalist. That's carried cargo, including newspapers, Devonshire cream, jam, growth in his humble beginning of Air Transport and Travel Limited. These are the events that belong to the whole world to witness that saw the launch of the world's first daily international scheduled air passenger service between London and Paris. In addition, it was a humble beginning of Air Transport and Travel Limited started the first decade by implementing the building blocks on travel of the future. By 1921, Daimler International purchased Air Travel and Travel Limited assets. The aircraft was then based out of Croydon Airfield towards the location area south of London, operating 6 de Havilland DH-34 aircraft. They further flew to a range of destinations, including Cologne, Amsterdam, in addition to the original Paris route of 1919. The impact of air travel has changed the landscape beyond recognition. Each 10 years saw the serious impact of new development and present challenges from a humble beginning of Air Transport and Travel Limited, which shaped the major journey path on travel of the future during the 20th century. It is very important milestone to remember how British Airways became the airline of 100 years ago, while exploring the past life of the 20th century and to think about the present issues and future legacy on the centenary by marking 100 years of British Airways. It is very relevant today as the past 100 years since 1919, which the world's first air passenger service started Travel of the Future from its humble beginning of Air Transport and Travel Limited. This is a very important milestone to remember the arrival journey of British Airways back to the birth of civil aviation that took place just 100 years ago. 5 years later, Air Transport and Travel Limited, Imperial Airways, began its air passenger service in 1924 from London Croydon to Paris Le Bourget, just 5 years after Air Travel and Transport launched the successful flight in 1919. Imperial Airways was created as the British government chosen instrument of air travel by the amalgamation of Instone Airline Limited, Handley Page Air Transport Limited, the Daimler Airways, and the British Maritime Air Navigation Company Limited. On May the 15th, 1925, Imperial Airways operated from London Croydon to Amsterdam, and Swedish Airline worked from Amsterdam to various routes to Copenhagen and Malmö. Imperial Airways introduced three-engine Armstrong Whitworth Aegon from London Croydon to Paris flight route on July the 16th, 1926. 6 months later, in January 1927, Imperial Airways operation opened additional flight route to Cairo, Baghdad, and Basra, sector of Britain to India flight route. On March the 30th, 1929, Imperial Airways integrated its direct flight from Britain to India route. In addition, the flight route reached Delhi 9 months later of December 1929. Imperial Airways integrated the United Kingdom domestic service from London to Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool twice weekly with Airways aircraft on June the 16th, 1930 as the starting journey to Travel of the Future. 8 months later, on February 1931, Imperial Airways introduced a weekly Britain to Central Africa passenger route by terminating on Lake Victoria by taking 10 days to cover 5,142 miles. On December the 9th, 1931, the Imperial Airways service that day for Central Africa was extended experimentally to Cape Town in South Africa for the carriage of Christmas mail. During the 3 months of 1932, route to East Africa by Cairo was developed by Imperial Airways. On this day of January the 20th, the mail-only route to Cape Town was open. On April the 27th, 1932, the flight by Imperial Airways was open to passengers, and the flight left London Croydon on Wednesday, landed in Cape Town on Sunday, 10 days later on May the 7th as Travel of the Future. Between January and February 1933, Imperial Airways Armstrong Whitworth flew from London Croydon to Cape Town, which was the first direct flight from Britain to South Africa on this type of aircraft. A year later, on May 1934, the first flight from London to Paris flight route with mail and passenger for the coming Africa service. In addition, 10 days later, on May the 26th, the first official Royal Mail pedicant was present to Imperial Airways when leaving from London Croydon to Paris with Indian Mail. 7 months later, on December 1934, United Kingdom to Australian mail service route was open, operated by Imperial Airways and Continental and Qantas from London, Karachi, Singapore, and Brisbane in Australia. During the year of 1935, Imperial Airways opened various routes to Brussels, Cologne, Halle, Leipzig, Prague, Vienna, and Budapest from London Croydon, with the DH-A Dyna class aircraft planning travel of the future. The route of Imperial Airways went to Sudan and Kano, Nigeria, operated in October 1936 to Lagos. 8 months later, Imperial Airways operated the first US service from its New York service to Bermuda on June the 19th, 1937. During the year of 1938, the Empire Airmail was extended to Egypt, Palestine, India, Burma, Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, and Malaya. The first heavy-than-air commercial crossing of the North Atlantic, which the aircraft separate from the short-flying boat near Faux, then flew to non-stop to Montreal in Canada. 2,930 miles in 20 hours and 20 minutes on July the 20th, 1938. The outbound flight took 4 hours and 30 minutes, while the inbound flight took 6 hours and 10 minutes on September the 18th, 1938. British Airways Limited make a non-stop service between London and Stockholm. Also ran with the Lockheed 14 GAFGN, which delivered to Heston on September the 3rd, 1938. The Imperial Airways DH-91 Falcon has set a new record, flying from London Croydon to Brussels in 48 minutes, just under 1 hour on New Year's Day of January the 10th, 1939. Just 90 days later, there was a joint Imperial and British Airways Limited from London to Paris with 8 weekly day service and 5 on Sunday on April the 16th, 1939. In addition, British Overseas Airways Corporation Bill, known as the BOAC, was introduced to the House of Commons for the coming merger of Imperial Airways and British Airways that was formed on April the 1st, 1940. Arrival of BOAC, known as British Overseas Airways Corporation, was as the new state airline just after 16 years on the day of April the 1st, 1924, which Imperial Airways and British Airways Limited decided to form the merger as part of a wartime to operate a wartime service under the control of the Ministry of Air Ministry, maintaining the Speedbird logo, first used by Imperial Airways. The airline must then use jet airliners with the introduction of the De Harvard and Comet into the fleet 12 years later in May 1952. From the year of 1941, British Overseas Airways Corporation started a special air service which flew from Luckhurst in Scotland to Stockholm in Sweden, which is known as the Barbarian Run, using Lockheed 14 aircraft. BOAC reopened the UK to Cairo route via Lisbon, Gibraltar, and Malta with Class C and Catalina flying boats in October. A year later, in October 1942, British Overseas Airways Corporation, BOAC, made its first experimental flight from Prestwick in Scotland to Moscow in Russia with a Liberator, which the flight took 13 hours and 9 minutes. The Air Transport Auxiliary played a huge contribution during the Second World War by delivering 308,567 aircraft of 147 types since 1940, which BOAC assured responsibility for the general administration of AT&A. From September 1944, British Overseas Airways Corporation completed the 100th crossing of the North Atlantic return ferry just 8 months before the Second World War ended in Europe of May the 7th, 1945. This is a very important milestone to remember the arrival journey of BOAC through the war also remember of the civil aviation following the pioneer days following the end of the First World War on November 11th, 1918. On November the 10th, 6 months after the Second World War ended, a joint BOAC South African Airways Springbok service was integrated, which took off from London to Johannesburg. On March the 15th, 1946, British South American Airways began a regular service from London to Buenos Aires by Lisbon, Bathurst, Natal, Rio de Janeiro, Montenegro, using Aveiro Lancastrian. 2 months later, Heathrow officially opened at the new London airport to replace the old Croydon grass airfield on May the 31st in 1946. British South American Airways operated the first international departure from there on January the 1st, 1946, after the wartime restriction on flying ended, carrying 13 staff passengers left on a proving long-haul flight to Buenos Aires. On July the 1st, which was 6 months later, in 1946, British Overseas Airway Corporation opened the flight route from London via Shannon, Gander, and New York. Was the first British civilian flight on the North Atlantic towards travel of the future. 9 months later, on April 15, 1947, the first commercial British Overseas Airway Corporation, known as BOC, Operation to Canada, started its weekly service from London Heathrow to Montreal via the flight route of Prestwick and Gander, going towards travel of the future. The first all-freight scheduled air service from the flight route from London via Brussels, Prague on a daily frequency commenced a weekly London to Tehran Douglas D3 service that started on August 10, 1947. 4 months later, in December, it was the start of the world's first all-cargo flight from London to Sydney, commenced by a Lancastrian aircraft. The month of February 1948 saw the opening flight route from London to Nairobi, operated by Aveiro York Craft Commercial. 60 days later, the weekly London to Johannesburg cargo service, operated by Lancastrian Aircraft, commenced on April 11, 1948. It was 16 months later the first land all plane service by Canada Air Argonaut from London to Hong Kong, flight route via Rome, Cairo, Basra, Karachi, Calcutta, Rangoon, and Bangkok took place on August 23, 1949. It was the first operated by an Agacus registration GALHJ. On December 7, 1949, BOAC operated the first London to New York Stratocruiser service, G. Eliza Cafe. The first flight was operated by G. Eliza Cafe, and the flight route traveled by Prestwick with a scheduled flying time of 19 hours and 45 minutes, also very close to 20 hours in the sky. The first British European Airways, known as BAE, service from London to Heathrow Airport to Paris, a Vickers Viking, which took place on April the 16th, 1950, just 1 month later of May 1950. The carriage of parcel mail services to North America and Africa commenced after 5 years after the Second World War ended. British Overseas Airway Corporation introduced the luxury Monarch service to New York using the Stratocruiser, which offer sleeper accommodation towards travel of the future in its implementation planning process. A year later, the first tourist fare introduced by British Overseas Airway Corporation on the North Atlantic flight on May the 1st, 1952. The following day, BOAC flew the world's first pure jet service from London Heathrow Airport to Johannesburg in South Africa by Rome, Beirut, Khartoum, Enelente, and Livingstone on May the 2nd, 1952. 11 months later, British European Airways introduced tourist fares on various flight routes through Europe on April the 1st, 1953. Just 48 hours later, on April the 3rd, 1953, British Overseas Airways Corporation introduced jet service Comet from head to Tokyo in Japan. The flight route on its arrival took 33 hours. Because during this period of the 50s, it was the preparation of the jet age. And also as well, the jet age, it was a preparation of travel of the future. And also as well, on the 4th of October 1958, British Overseas Airways Corporation was able to operate the first transatlantic pure jet service from London to New York using Comet 4 by arriving into the jet age, travel of the future. It was the same year when they did the jet age to other countries like Canada, the Philippines, Australia, and New Zealand. And also as well, they did the jet age to the Caribbean service during the time between 1958 and 1973. In 1965, during June, at London Heathrow Airport, a British European Trident made the world's first fully automatic landing carrying commercial passenger. And also in the year of 1971, BOAC introduced the 747 jet, which flew from London to New York, because at least it been the 747 known as the jet age journey towards travel of the future. Because in addition, the service of British Airways, it came by the merger together by the previous name, and also we have the arrival of the supersonic, the jet age of Concorde, and various jet. They've been through the ages since 1919, and also as well, they've been taking the centenary year, because in 2019 it was the centenary year of British Airways. It was launched in 1919, known as Air Travel and Travel Limited, and also as well, it's been the centenary year. It reflects on the history and the heritage of British Airways. It was 100 years ago when the arrival of civil aviation, its arrival journey of British Airways, came after the First World War ended, because it was the preparation that led to travel of the future. And also the uniqueness of British Airways, it opened the world, it opened itself to the world, and the world came to Britain. And also as well, when you look at the world, they talk about travel aviation. It was an eye opener. And also as well, since the decade passed, the airline have moved strength to strength. And also as well, during the last many years, Heathrow Airport Terminal 5 was open in 2008. It was the arrival of the Airbus 380 and the Dreamer 787. It was heading towards travel of the future. And also as well, during the year 2012, British Airways and Iberia formed International Airline Group, IAG, in 2011. And 1 year later, in 2012, they was carrying the Olympic torch on the Airbus A319, which named the Firefly, which helped to sponsor the Olympic and the Paralympic to London in 2012. In 2019, it was the centenary year of British Airways, which came 100 years ago. with the first international air flight, which took place from London to Paris 100 years ago. Because the flight in the day used to take 2 hours and 30 minutes. Today's flight, 100 years later, is 45 minutes, 1 hour on the air. And also as well, in addition, I'd like to tell you more about myself. My name's Aaron Baptiste. I got experience as a commercial actor. I've got more than 15 years experience with acting credits to my name. And also as well, I have worked on various commercial, film, I've spoken on radio, theatre, TV, voiceover for such clients as Heathrow Airport. And also as well, in addition, I'm also a passenger who have traveled on the plane. As a student, I used to live in the Caribbean as a young boy in St. Lucia back in the early days. I used to travel on the old BOAC back in the 70s. And also since then, I had traveled as a passenger while I was a university student. I had the experience of been traveling on major airline. And also as well, I already written subjects on other books like My Story, Invention about the Great Fire of London. I've done stuff on very innovation about the drawing design on Explore 100 Years of British Airways. The journey starts from 1919 all the way to Travel of the Future, because it was 100 years ago when this launched the first international air service from Hounslow Heath that led the benchmark to go forward. And also as well, on the 10th of November in 2019, it will be the 100th anniversary of the first international air mail service, which left London Hounslow Heath to Paris. It was 10 weeks after the first passenger took off from the same spot at Hounslow Heath. And also, so next year, in 2020, it will be the 100th anniversary when the first Amsterdam to London flight took place with Air Transport and Travel Limited, which was the forerunners for British Airways, because they was involved in a joint venture back in 1920 with KLM, which was the start of the 100-year relationship between these two countries. Because back in the day, from London to Amsterdam, it was the same distance, 2 hours and 30 minutes. Today, from London to Amsterdam, is between 45 minutes to 1 hour in the air. Because in addition, I'm a very creative entrepreneur with a passion for British heritage and history who wanted to educate people on the uniquely rich and vibrant history on civil aviation, on British Airways and its arrival journey at the world's first scheduled air passenger service that started in Britain by launching the daily international flight route from London to Paris. The flight route took 2 hours and 30 minutes, which took off from London Hounslow Heath just 100 years ago on August 25th, 1919. It was 100 years later. British Airways became the major airline of today, because what they did 100 years ago, it was a unique achievement. And also as well, it led the way forward of implementing travel of the future. Because when you look at that journey of British Airways, they have come a long way from short-haul aircraft to bigger aircraft. It was a unique journey that took place 100 years ago.